Hello again. This is Michael Whitaker. This is photo post number 21 of the 21 photo posts I'm doing on LinkedIn and sharing on Facebook. This is the last post in this series. The topic of this post is created juxtaposition. We'll get into that in just a minute. The photo for this post is Do You See What I See? And I'll explain the title a little bit later. As I mentioned last time, sometimes I capture images during the process of another project. This image, Do You See What I See?, is part of the behind the scenes at the Prague Zoo project and also the restricted attention project. I was there to do behind the scenes at the Prague Zoo, but as it turned out, this image very nicely fit with my concept for restricted attention. Juxtaposition involves two things: being in close proximity, being close to one another, and because they're close to one another, those two things sort of generate comparisons, contrast, or interesting effects. It's really that simple. Juxtaposition exists in a number of fields. It's most common in the literature field, poetry, literature, telling stories, that sort of thing. There's a lot of it in movies. But there's also a lot of juxtaposition in photography. If you do an internet search that says classes in juxtaposition, you'll see numerous alternatives. So there's different ways to learn how to do that. In my experience, and whenever I do a new post, I do some brief research to see what the options are. There are still three primary types of juxtaposition. I'm not going to go into them. But I also found some articles that include 18, 20, 23 types of juxtaposition. I even found one photography blog that suggested there are 27 types of juxtaposition. But that's really not important. For my purpose, in my photography, I only basically deal with two types of juxtaposition. One is encountered or discovered. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a minute. The other is created or manipulated. Do You See What I See is a created or a slightly manipulated image with juxtaposition in it. If you're not familiar with the concept, I want to show you 5 quick images. I'm a big fan of juxtaposition. I've always been fascinated by it, and it shows up a lot in my photographs. So I'm going to show you 5 of my photos that include that within them. The first is from a flea market in Paris. It's the big flea market in Paris. If you've never taken a photo with juxtaposition before, flea markets are a great place to go because things tend to be shoved together at the last minute. This image has a carousel horse. It has a doll sitting on a toy surrey, small cart. It has a partially disassembled toy car. There's a slot machine in the background, and over here is the facade mantle to go around a fireplace. So a lot of things are going on. The fact that all of these things are together immediately brings up issues about comparisons and contrast and interesting ideas. So flea markets are a good place to find photos that represent juxtaposition. Graffiti also provides excellent opportunities to capture images of juxtaposition. This photograph is in Antibes, France. I had been to Norway with my friend Amos Nakum. We'd gone back to Antibes for the Underwater Photo Festival. It's in late November. We'd been 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle photographing orcas. So I was very pleased to get back in the warm climate. So between sessions at the photo festival, I went out, walked around, took my camera with me, and captured images. This image is of a narrow passageway down near the docks. I had basic French in college, 4 semesters, but I still have very basic French. The sign says basically no dumping. The top sign up here in the top basically says it's prohibited to distribute refuse in this area. This round sign says no two-wheelers, no bicycles. So here's 2 official signs in this, in essence, an alleyway, and graffiti artists have come in and spray painted this really interesting face. I believe it's of a female, and then written other graffiti. This is all juxtaposed, and it makes an interesting photo. This is from what I call Curio Shops. This, I don't know if they'd like being called a curio shop, but this is from a store called A. Schwab's on Bill Street in Memphis, Tennessee. And they have aisles and aisles and aisles of things all pushed together. What caught my attention was this small statue or figurine of these 3 young ladies sitting on a bench. Next to them, behind them, these are peacock feathers. Over here's a flag. Over here's a line of hats that say Memphis, MEMPHIS. And down at the bottom is a wooden box that on the top of it says Sweetheart. I saw this image. I looked down, saw Sweetheart, and I thought the Sweetheart applies to these 3 girls, 3 young girls sitting on this bench. So the girls are juxtaposed next to the word sweetheart. That's juxtaposition. Curio shops are a great place to capture images that include juxtaposed items in them. This is a photograph from a tourist hotel in Cuba. If you don't know Spanish, the sign right here says, the preferred one of Cuba. I walked up, I saw this statue of this naked couple standing there, and this sign, the preferred one of Cuba. Is the male figure the preferred one, or is the female figure the preferred one? A Cuban friend of mine says the preferred one in Cuba is heterosexuality. So it has multiple meanings. The preferred one is actually Cristobal beer, which is the favorite beer in Cuba. This is a beer umbrella in an outdoor dining area next to a swimming pool in a tourist hotel in Cuba. But again, I thought it made a really interesting comparison. The preferred one of Cuba, does this couple represent that? Maybe, maybe not. The last one I'll show you here is a photograph I captured in Venice while my wife and I were there. Where we stayed was in a residential area. Through our window, we could see this house across the canal. There was a canal between our room and the house across the canal. Every morning, like clockwork, the lady of the house opened this window. The bird cage was sort of on a swivel. She swiveled the bird cage out, closed the window. The instant the window was closed, the pigeons showed up. And they sat there. One of them's actually sitting on top of the cage. The other 2 are just beneath the cage. This is a classic juxtaposed image. It compares 2 distinct concepts: the freedom of the pigeon and the capture of the canary. I showed this image to a group of homeless mothers in the program I worked in Florida for homeless families. I was making another point when I showed this image in my slideshow. As soon as this image was up there and I finished talking about it, one of the homeless mothers raised her hand and said, I think you should change the name of this picture. The original name was Visiting Hours, which seemed to me very appropriate for the pigeons to come visit the caged bird. And I said, okay, what do you think the title of this image should be? And she said, the title should be You Decide. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, as homeless people, we need to decide if we want to be pigeons or if we want to be canaries. She said, as canaries, we'll be kept in a cage, but we'll be fed, we'll be watered, all of our needs will be met. But as pigeons, we're able to fly around and do what we want to do. So there were 18 homeless mothers in the room at the time. I said, let's take a poll. How many people want to be pigeons? How many people want to be the canary in the nice, secure environment? Every single mother wanted to be the pigeon. And that's very typical, I found, when I work with homeless people. They preferred being the pigeon instead of the canary in the cage. This, again, is a classic comparison between two different concepts. So these 5 are very distinct, juxtaposed images. They're all images that I encountered or that I discovered. Back to the photo for this post. I was capturing images at the Prague Zoo. Last time I talked about written project descriptions. In my written description of this project, I saw 3 possibilities for photographs. The first was just to photograph animals by themselves, animals interacting with other animals. I showed you a picture previously called 4 giraffes, where there were animals interacting with animals. The second option was the zookeepers, the personnel at the zoo, interacting with animals. And the third option was watching the visitors, the zoo visitors, observe the animals. That's the category that this image falls into. It's a photo of the zoo visitors observing the animals. Behind the scenes means I got to go behind the scenes. But behind the scenes in this image does not mean that I'm inside the enclosure with the elephant. The elephant couldn't get to me and I couldn't get to the elephant. But I was inside the elephant compound. And from my perspective inside the elephant compound, I could see the zoo visitors observing the elephant. But I couldn't see the elephant at this point. There was a wall between me and the elephant. I could just see the visitors, off to my right. When I came around the edge of the wall, this is the image I originally saw. I saw the hindquarters of the elephant and all of these visitors staring at it. If you look at their faces, they are focused on this elephant. They're even taking a picture here. And over here, they're sort of veering off just a little. But these people appear to be staring straight at the rear end of the elephant. This struck me as a humorous concept, or the opportunity to catch a humorous image. So I looked and the people just kept staring there. At one point I started wondering, why are these people staring like that? But I framed the image. I took my camera, shifted my position just a little. The wall that I was behind is just outside the left side of this image. So I changed my camera slightly to leave the wall out of the image. I didn't want the wall. It interfered with the message I was trying to make. So I just captured the rear end of this elephant and these people transfixed, staring at the elephant's rear end. It seemed funny to me. I knew it was juxtaposed. I thought at worst it just creates an interesting situation or interesting issues. Why are these people staring at the rear end of this elephant? This image has been in 2 different shows, one in Maryland, one in Oregon. So there were completely different people that viewed this image on opposite coast. In both shows, in each of those shows, those 2 shows, people came up to me and said, "Why are these people staring at the elephant's rear end?" One woman said, "Is the elephant about to give birth? Why are these people staring at the elephant's rear end?" And I said, I think if the elephant was about to give birth, it would be in private. It wouldn't be out where the whole world could ask. But I think that means I was somewhat successful in capturing a juxtaposed image that had a sense of humor to it. So I felt like this was a relatively successful image. In Oregon, one man even considered buying this image. And I said, "Why do you want to buy this image? Do you love it that much?" He said, "I'm a Democrat." Those of you who are not Americans probably won't understand this. But he said, "I'm a Democrat, and my closest friend is a Republican." Those are the 2 basic political parties in America. Republicans have elephants as their mascot, so to speak. And he said, "My best friend is a Republican, and I am thinking about buying this image to give him." And he made up a very clever title that would go in it. And he said, "Do you put your titles and signatures on the front of the image?" And I said, "No, it's always on the back. I don't want to put the writing on the front of the image." So he said, "I think I'm going to buy this." About that time, his wife came over and said, "You've already decided to buy one of his photos. Why don't you think about this one?" And he had already bought one of my photos. So the guy said, "Well, let me think about it. I'll give you a call tomorrow." He called back the next day and said, "My wife's talked me out of it, but I love your image. Is there someplace else I can find it to show my friend?" And I said, "Not at this point." So I set out to make an interesting photo in which 2 elements were juxtaposed to create humor, and I think I was somewhat successful. If you look at the images or think about the images I showed you first, juxtaposed images are throughout the world. If you're looking for them, they're easy to find. You can either discover them or you can create them. And that's all I have to say about Do You See What I See? This is the last video in this series of 21 videos. There will be something next, but I'm not quite sure what it is. This is the last video. There will be one more post in this series without a photo about which I'll talk, and I'll put that on LinkedIn and Facebook in a couple of days with ideas about what comes next. My photo mentor is a guy named Jeff Brown, who is on LinkedIn. I have an appointment with him in about 10 days, and after I speak with Jeff, I'll decide what's next. But at this point, I want to express my appreciation for the interest that's been shown in these series. It's actually been fun for me to do and talk about these 21 photos. I appreciate there was enough interest in what's going on in my head for me to do this series. So I'm very pleased that I did it. I'm pleased that there was interest. Like I said, this will be the last video in this series. There will be another post for those of you on LinkedIn and Facebook. So at this point, I'll say so long. I hope to see you at some point in the future. Thank you very much for participating with me. Goodbye.